First of all, it's great to be home in my hometown of Calgary, where I grew up, delivering the Calgary Sun. I think we have some Sun people here. We have the Dinger. Rick Bell grew up reading the Dinger, and Rick has lost some weight since then. Rick looks great. I delivered his paper. I also got a chance to work at the Calgary Stampede, worked over at TELUS Communications. And my story is I was raised by a couple of school teachers. And you know what, my memories of that time, growing up in the 80s and the 90s, is that though we didn't have a ton of money and we went through hard times like everyone did, particularly in the early 80s, we always had enough for meat and potatoes on the dinner table. We had a nice house in the suburbs with our own yard, our own dog. I was even able to, my folks were able to save up enough to get me registered for hockey in my early, late, around 12 or 13 years old. A little late, too late to make the NHL, but so I had to settle for politics. But the great thing was, above and beyond all of the particulars of our material existence, was the promise for the future, the hope. My folks always told me, you want it, you work for it, and you can have it. That's the great thing about Canada. If you work hard, you get a great life. And I think my friends Jasraj Singh Halan, Delwinder Gill, Pat Kelly, Amanpreet Gill, David McKenzie, all have similar stories from their childhoods in this area. And I know, for example, Jazz grew up here. I think you were, was it Bowness? Or?
It was in the Northeast, in
Whitehorn, and grew up modest means, but was able to get a great education, start his own business, build homes, and have a great career, and now is the pride of his entire community. And I think every one of these MPs can share the same story. That was the deal in Canada, but that deal is broken after 10 years of Liberal inflation. They've doubled housing costs, doubled lined-ups at food banks, and what do you know? That coincided with them doubling the national debt. When you borrow and print money, you drive up the cost of everything and destroy the working class. Now, for the first time in the history of Canada, our young people cannot afford homes. We have an entire generation of youth who believe they will never be able to afford a place to live. Food bank lineups are up to 2.2 million. CBC was trying to comfort us just yesterday with a news story saying, hey, good news, you can get more affordable food if you go to this special shopping mart where they sell you food that's past the best before date. So now you can buy rotten food, and and you'll be able to afford it. So that is the CBC's solution to Liberal food price inflation, which gets worse and worse every single day. Now 20% of Canadians are skipping bills because they have to put the money to higher grocery costs. This is the unnecessary result of Liberal policies. And before we go blaming some exterior factor, let's be clear. Food prices in Canada are rising 50% faster than in the United States. We are the only country, according to the food professor, that has had 4 consecutive quarters of food prices rising faster than the Bank of Canada's target. This after Mark Carney promised that he would be judged by the prices at the grocery store. Well, so much for that promise. He's broken every single promise he made. He promised the fastest growing economy in the G7. He's delivered the fastest shrinking economy. He promised that he would negotiate a win and a deal with Trump by July 21st. Still no win, still no deal, still no elbows, still no jobs. He promised to double home building. Home building is expected to drop by 13%. He promised that we would have develop our resources and increase investment. According to his own budget documents, investment has dropped in every one of the quarters since he became Prime Minister 8 months ago. He promised that he would spend less. And of course, that is the biggest broken promise at all. We now see Carney's costly credit card budget. He doubles Trudeau's deficit. You know, it's almost unthinkable. No one thought anyone could spend more money than Justin Trudeau. But Mark Carney said, hold my beer. And he came along with a deficit that is twice the size of the one that Justin Trudeau left behind. A deficit of $78 billion is the biggest in history outside of COVID, $16 billion bigger than Carney promised during the election. It is almost all due to increased spending, not due to tariffs from abroad. In fact, Mr. Carney has brought in $150 billion of new spending and offset by the promised savings that he says he will achieve over the next 5 years. It's a net increase of $90 billion. Almost all of it is on operating expenditures, not on capital investments. This is with a doubling deficit, the biggest non-COVID deficit in Canadian history. Mark Carney has introduced a credit card budget that will drive up your cost of food, housing, and fuel. And that is why Conservatives unanimously oppose it. Furthermore, the costly Carney credit card budget will also increase taxes on farmers, food, and home building. So you've got an industrial carbon tax, which the budget proposes to raise. Well, that applies. I was just in Stettler yesterday and saw all the steel that goes into farming, on the tractors, the combines, the bins, the barns. All of that will become more expensive because of Carney's carbon tax, which he promises to more than double in this budget. Carney's industrial carbon tax on farmers is a tax on your food. That same carbon tax will apply to steel, aluminum, glass, concrete, cement, and other home building supplies. I have a former home builder here in Jazraj Halan, and he can tell you that when you tax the things that go into homes, you tax homes. The industrial carbon tax of Mark Carney is a tax on homes, a tax on food and homes. Why don't you tell us what that will mean to the cost of a new home, Jazz?
Thanks, Leader. After 10 years of this Liberal government, home ownership is unattainable. You can ask any of the young Canadians, where a majority of them have just given up on home ownership altogether. This country used to be a place where certainly my family, when we moved here, and subsequent years after that, even as a home builder, until the Liberals took over, one income could get you a good living. You would be able to scrap money together and save up for a down payment. But after 10 years of the Liberals, all of that is gone. That Canadian dream of being able to owning a home, raising a family, it's all gone. And it's because the cost of everything has just skyrocketed, and this budget does nothing for home building that's going to improve it. As the Leader said, by introducing this industrial carbon tax from before and promising to raise the price on that, the more input costs into the home building is only going to make things worse. On top of all that, this is the same Liberal government that spent about $90 billion they committed to home building, only to double home costs, housing costs. And now they're creating a fourth bureaucracy. The first three got us to this point. It's unfathomable that they would create a fourth bureaucracy to make home building slow down even worse. In fact, their own housing agency has said that home building starts are going to decrease this year and next year. And that is scary, because that Canadian dream that everyone wants to be able to own a home is going to be unattainable. As a former home builder, we need to get the bureaucracy out of the way. We need to lower the government costs and make sure that builders are able to build, buyers are able to buy. But today, under the Liberals, after 10 years, builders can't build, buyers can't buy, and sellers can't sell. Only a Conservative government under Pierre Poilievre will fire those gatekeepers and make sure home building is attainable, so we can bring back that Canadian dream where Canada is affordable and safe once again.
There you go. Thank you. And if you don't believe Jazz and I, then listen to the Home Building Association itself, Build, B-I-L-T, out of Toronto. They quote, I'm quoting them to say, what was once a promise to deliver 500,000 new homes annually has now become a plan that will cost 100,000 jobs. Canadians are now facing the prospect of a worsening crisis that will impact housing supply, employment, economic activity, and ultimately middle-class families. So this budget, which increases home building taxes, risks 100,000 home building jobs, according to the people who actually build homes. I have here a quote from Fitch Budget. Fitch, the credit rating agency, and they say that this deficit, which Mark Carney has doubled, will now threaten our credit rating. Let me just bring in the chair of our shadow cabinet economic affairs subcommittee, small businessman and member of parliament, Pat Kelly.
Well, thank you, Pierre. This budget does nothing to deal with the cost of living crisis that Canadians are enduring right now, because it just piles on more debt that fuels the inflation that is driving up the cost of living. At $78.3 billion, this is nearly double the deficit that less than a year ago was considered to be so high that it precipitated a crisis in the resignation of the last finance minister. So what was an unthinkably high deficit less than a year ago, the new prime minister has nearly doubled. And this is just going to drive up the cost of living, driving up inflation. We had expert testimony at the Finance Committee last week that talked about the break glass emergency of productivity in Canada. And low productivity means higher cost of living. It means that people cannot, their paychecks are not keeping up with the higher cost of living. Canada's productivity is at the bottom of the OECD. Our per capita GDP over the 10-year period of this government has not increased. We are at the bottom of the OECD and the G7 for per capita GDP over this time period. And there's no relief for, there's no solution for the productivity crisis in this budget. There are no meaningful fiscal anchors because this government breaks every fiscal anchor that it ever assigns to itself. So this budget is not a solution, and conservatives like Pierre Poilievre have been sounding the alarm bell for years on this.
Thank you, Pat. And again, if you don't believe Pat and I, then you'll believe Fitch, which said Canada's proposed budget announced in Parliament November 4th underscores the erosion of the federal government's finances, while Canada's rating is broadly stable. Persistent fiscal expansion and a rising debt burden have weakened its credit profile and could increase rating pressure over the medium term. The budget expands the forecast federal deficit to $78.3 billion. General government deficits of 3.3% of GDP, which is higher than the AA median of 2.3 and substantially higher than Canada's pre-pandemic deficits, which averaged 0.4 in the prior decades. And finally, it says that combined with the sizable non-budgetary financing needs, the higher deficit will substantially increase general government debt, which is forecast to be 92% of GDP in 2025, up from 88.6 in 2024, before accelerating to 98.5% by 2027, nearly double the forecast AA medium of 49.6. Now, those are a lot of numbers, but let's cut right down to it. To be a AA rated country, on average, your debt to GDP is 49.6%. Carney's on track to bring ours to nearly 100%. In other words, our debt as a share of GDP will be almost twice the size of the average AA country. That's the kind of fiscal mess that Mark Carney and the Liberals are creating. So much for he's gone from promising to be a brilliant economist to being the most costly, reckless, and risky prime minister in Canadian history, and that is why Conservatives will oppose it. But we not only oppose, we propose. Our proposal is to cut bureaucracy, consultants, foreign aid, corporate welfare, handouts to phony refugees, and other wasted money so we can bring down debt, taxes, and inflation. We would get rid of the industrial carbon tax to unlock the industrial engine of our nation and to reduce the price of everything made with steel, aluminum, cement, concrete, glass. That is everything that we buy. We will cap government spending for a dollar for dollar law, requiring we find $1 of savings for every new dollar of spending. We'll make this the fastest place on earth to get a building permit, repeal the anti-energy laws, use the powers in C5 to rapidly approve a pipeline to the Pacific so we can get 1 million barrels of oil to Asia every single day. We will get rid of the capital gains tax on anyone who reinvests their money in Canada to bring home the $500 billion of